Welcome to the Hodja on Architecture podcast, AI and Architectural Design, Chapter 6, Hybrid Authorship, Rethinking Creativity in the Age of AI. In the previous chapter, we examined how underlying layers of style, memory, and bias shape AI-generated outputs. What appeared as a field of open possibilities was revealed to be structured, informed by accumulated references and embedded tendencies. The design process, rather than unfolding in a neutral environment, was shown to operate within a field of influence. But once these hidden layers are acknowledged, another question inevitably emerges. Who or what is responsible for the result? If the output is shaped by both the system and the designer, then how is authorship to be understood? In traditional architectural practice, authorship has been closely tied to the figure of the designer. Even within collaborative environments, the notion of authorship tends to stabilize around identifiable individuals or teams. The project is attributed, credited, and positioned within a lineage of work. Creativity, in this context, is often associated with originality, intention, and individual expression. The designer is understood as the source from which the idea emerges. Artificial intelligence complicates this structure. When a design emerges through interaction, through prompts, responses, selections, and revisions, the origin of the idea becomes less clear. The output is not produced in a single moment of creation, but through a sequence of exchanges. The system contributes variation. The designer contributes judgment. The result is not entirely attributable to one or the other. This condition introduces what can be described as hybrid authorship. Authorship is no longer singular, but distributed across different agents within the process. However, this distribution is not symmetrical. Artificial intelligence does not possess intention, nor does it claim authorship. It generates possibilities based on patterns within its data. The designer, by contrast, operates with intention, evaluation, and direction. The design emerges at the intersection of these two modes. The difficulty lies in how this intersection is interpreted. If authorship is traditionally linked to creation, then the presence of AI challenges that link. The system produces outputs that appear complete, sometimes even refined. The designer selects, modifies, and integrates these outputs into a broader framework. The boundary between generating and designing becomes less distinct. This does not mean that authorship disappears. Rather, it shifts from production to orchestration. The designer's role is no longer defined solely by the ability to generate form, but by the ability to guide a process. Decisions become the primary site of authorship. What is chosen, what is rejected, what is developed further. These actions define the trajectory of the design. In this sense, creativity is redefined. It is no longer confined to the moment of invention, but extends across the process of selection and transformation. The designer engages with a field of possibilities and shapes it through critical judgment. The creative act becomes distributed across time, rather than concentrated in a single gesture. At the same time, this distribution introduces a certain ambiguity. If the system contributes to the generation of ideas, to what extent can the designer claim ownership of them? This question is not only philosophical, but also practical. It touches on issues of credit, responsibility, and intellectual property. However, beyond these concerns, it raises a more fundamental issue. What does it mean to create in a context where ideas emerge through interaction? One way to approach this is to reconsider the notion of originality. In architecture, originality has rarely meant complete novelty. Precedents, references, and cultural contexts have always informed designs. What is considered original is often a transformation of existing material. AI makes this condition more explicit. It reveals the extent to which design operates through recombination and reinterpretation. From this perspective, hybrid authorship is not entirely new. It extends a condition that has always been present, but renders it more visible. The difference lies in the immediacy and scale of the interaction. AI accelerates the process, producing variations rapidly and making selection more prominent. The designer becomes more aware of the decisions that shape the outcome. This awareness, however, does not guarantee clarity. The presence of multiple possibilities can lead to a diffusion of responsibility. If a system partially generates the output, it may be tempting to attribute its qualities to the system itself. Success may be credited externally, failure may be displaced. These dynamic risks weaken the designer's engagement with the process. To avoid this, it becomes necessary to reassert the role of judgment. Artificial intelligence does not evaluate its own outputs in a meaningful sense. It does not distinguish between what is appropriate and what is inappropriate within a given context. That responsibility remains with the designer. Authorship, therefore, is not located in the act of generation, but in the act of evaluation. This repositioning has implications for how design is taught and practiced. In the studio, students must be encouraged not only to produce outputs, but to justify their decisions. The process must be accompanied by reflection. Why was a particular option selected? How does it relate to the initial intent? What alternatives were considered, and why were they rejected? These questions anchor authorship within the process. The notion of hybrid authorship also invites a reconsideration of collaboration. Architecture has always been a collaborative discipline involving multiple actors: engineers, consultants, clients, and users. AI can be understood as an additional participant within this network, not as a conscious agent, but as a system that contributes to the generation of possibilities. The designer's role is to integrate this contribution within a coherent framework. This integration requires a careful balance. Over-reliance on AI may lead to a loss of direction, in which the process is driven by generated outputs rather than guided by intention. Conversely, excessive control may limit the system's potential, reducing it to a mere extension of existing habits. The effectiveness of hybrid authorship lies in maintaining a productive tension between these positions. At a broader level, the shift towards hybrid authorship reflects a change in how creativity is conceptualized. Creativity is no longer understood as an isolated act, but as a relational process. It emerges through interaction, between designer and system, between intention and variation, between reference and transformation. The focus moves from the individual creator to the conditions under which creation occurs. This does not diminish the role of the designer. On the contrary, it intensifies it. The presence of AI increases the complexity of the process, requiring a more deliberate and reflective engagement. The designer must navigate a wider field of possibilities, evaluate them critically, and construct a coherent outcome. The responsibility for the design remains, even as the process becomes more distributed. If the previous chapter revealed the hidden layers that shape AI-generated outputs, this chapter addresses the question of agency within that structure. Who acts, who decides, and who is accountable? The answer is not singular, but it is not indeterminate either. The system generates, but does not intend. The designer intends, but does not generate alone. The design emerges through this interaction. This brings us back to the central question: who designs the design? In the context of hybrid authorship, the answer must be reframed. The design is not authored in isolation, but it is not authorless. It is shaped through a sequence of decisions made within a structured field of possibilities. Authorship resides in the ability to navigate that field. In the next chapter, we will move from authorship to culture and examine how AI functions as a mediator between different design traditions, particularly in contexts where multiple cultural frameworks intersect. The discussion will shift from agency to translation, from who creates to how ideas move across contexts. Because once authorship becomes hybrid, the next question becomes unavoidable. How does this hybrid process operate across cultures? And what happens when design thinking itself becomes a site of translation? This concludes Chapter 6 of AI and Architectural Design: Hybrid Authorship, Rethinking Creativity in the Age of AI. Thanks for listening. See you in the next episode.